Emily Dawson was just another face in the city. To the strangers she passed on the bustling streets, she was little more than a blur on two wheels, weaving through traffic with the efficiency of someone who had spent years perfecting her craft. On paper, her job was straightforward: pick up orders, deliver them, repeat. No fanfare, no applause, just the hum of her bike and the occasional thanks from someone barely looking up from their phone. To most people, she was invisible. A name they glanced at on a delivery app and promptly forgot. Emily Dawson is on her way, the notification would read. And that was it. They didn't think about who Emily was, what her story might be, or why she seemed to deliver faster and more precisely than anyone else. But Emily. She was much more than they could ever imagine. On the surface, Emily was calm, unbothered by the chaos of the city streets. She moved with an almost mechanical precision, her helmet securely strapped, her eyes always scanning for the quickest path through the maze of cars, pedestrians, and construction zones. She looked like someone who had done this 1,000 times, and she had. But what no one knew, what Emily made sure no one knew, was that her experience didn't come from years of food deliveries or running errands. Beneath the helmet and leather jacket, Emily carried a secret that could shock even the boldest bikers in the city, a secret that could turn the most fearless thrill seekers into stunned spectators. Her calm demeanor wasn't just the result of confidence, it was the product of a life spent mastering danger. Emily wasn't just another delivery woman, she was a professional stunt driver. For years, Emily had worked behind the scenes of blockbuster action movies, pulling off impossible maneuvers on motorcycles, cars, and even horseback. Her name never appeared in the credits, and her face was never on the posters. But her skills. Her skills were the reason heroes in movies could escape fiery explosions, leap off cliffs, and outrun villains with milliseconds to spare. She was the hidden force behind the most jaw-dropping stunts Hollywood had to offer. But after years in the industry, Emily had decided to take a step back. The long hours, the constant risk, the pressure to outdo herself with every scene, it had all become too much. She wanted something simple, something quiet. Or so she thought. Delivery work seemed like the perfect escape. No cameras, no scripts, no high-speed chases, just her bike, and the city. At first, it worked. The early mornings and late nights didn't bother her. She enjoyed the freedom of the open road, the sense of accomplishment in completing each route. But there was one thing Emily hadn't counted on: the city itself. It had its own challenges, its own dangers. And tonight, those dangers would come roaring to life in the form of a group of bikers who were about to make the worst mistake of their lives. It started like any other evening. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city. Emily had just picked up an order, a piping hot pizza destined for an apartment complex across town. She glanced at the address on her phone, mapped out the fastest route in her head, and revved her engine. The streets were alive with the usual chaos: honking horns, flashing lights, and the endless hum of people rushing to be somewhere. Emily navigated it all with ease, her bike slipping through tight gaps and darting across intersections with a confidence that could only come from years of experience. She didn't think twice about the roar of engines that suddenly joined the symphony of city noise. At first, it was faint, just a distant hum that blended into the background. But as she approached a red light, the sound grew louder. A group of bikers, their engines growling like restless beasts, pulled up beside her. They were dressed in leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias, their helmets tilted back to reveal smirking faces. One of them, a man with a scar running down his cheek, leaned over his handlebars and grinned. "Hey, delivery girl," he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "Where's the fire? Or are you just in a hurry to get those pizzas to some poor sap who can't cook?" The others laughed, their voices a mix of amusement and arrogance. Emily didn't respond. She kept her eyes on the road ahead, her grip on the handlebars steady. "Come on, don't be shy," another biker chimed in. He revved his engine, the sound echoing off the buildings. "We're just having a little fun." Emily remained silent. It wasn't the first time she'd dealt with people like this, men who mistook her quiet demeanor for weakness. But she knew better than to engage. She also knew that ignoring them wouldn't always make them go away. The light turned green, and Emily took off. She didn't speed or swerve, didn't do anything to suggest she was rattled. She simply did what she always did, focused on the road and the task at hand. But the bikers weren't ready to let her go. "Looks like she's in a hurry," one of them shouted, his voice carrying over the roar of engines. The group followed her, their bikes forming a loose pack that surrounded her like a predator circling its prey. Emily's mind raced not with fear, but with calculations. She noted the number of bikes, their positions, and the rider's body language. Years of stunt work had trained her to read situations like this in an instant. These weren't professional racers or experienced riders, they were thrill seekers, overconfident and reckless. And that, she knew, was their weakness. One of the bikers swerved closer, his tire nearly touching hers. "What's the matter? Can't handle a little company?" he taunted. Still, Emily said nothing. But her silence wasn't a sign of submission, it was the calm before the storm. Emily kept her composure, her breathing steady as her mind worked through the possibilities. She could feel the weight of their stares, their overconfidence radiating off them like heat. They thought they had the upper hand. To them, she was just a delivery girl, out of her depth and at their mercy. But Emily was far from helpless. The lead biker, the one with the scar, pulled ahead and cut sharply into her path, forcing her to slow down. His grin widened as he looked back over his shoulder. "What's the matter, sweetheart? Lost your nerve already?" The others roared with laughter, their bikes closing in tighter. Emily glanced at the scarred man, her expression unreadable behind the visor of her helmet. She could have said something, could have challenged him with words, but she knew better. Words were meaningless here. Actions would speak louder. The group's laughter echoed through the street as they continued to surround her. To anyone watching, it might have seemed like a game, a pack of bikers messing with someone just for the thrill of it. But Emily knew how quickly games like this could turn dangerous. She adjusted her grip on the handlebars, her fingers tightening ever so slightly. The bikers' movements were sloppy, their coordination lacking. They had power in numbers, sure, but they weren't a team. They were individuals, each more concerned with showing off than working together. Emily saw their weaknesses clearly, and she would exploit every single one of them. The scarred man suddenly slowed down, forcing Emily to brake hard to avoid colliding with him. The jolt of the stop sent a tremor through her bike, but she held steady. Another biker pulled up beside her, leaning in close enough that she could feel the heat of his engine. "You sure you're in the right line of work?" he sneered. "Looks like you can't handle the pressure." Emily turned her head slightly, her visor reflecting his smug expression. Inside, she was calm, calculating. These men didn't know who they were dealing with. If they had, they would have already backed off. The scarred man twisted the throttle, his bike roaring as he sped ahead. "Let's see what you've got," he shouted over his shoulder. The rest of the group followed suit, their engines screaming as they took off down the road. Emily hesitated for only a moment, enough to let them think they had shaken her. Then, with a subtle flick of her wrist, she opened up the throttle, her bike roaring to life as she took off after them. The city blurred around her as she gained speed, the wind whipping past her helmet. The bikers were fast, but Emily was faster. She wasn't just chasing them, she was studying them, analyzing their patterns, their weaknesses. She knew how to handle speed, how to maneuver through tight spaces, how to control her bike with the precision of a surgeon. It wasn't long before she caught up, her bike slipping effortlessly into the middle of their pack. The bikers looked over their shoulders, their smug expressions faltering as they realized she wasn't as easy to shake as they'd thought. "Looks like she wants to play," one of them shouted, his voice tinged with disbelief. Emily didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her actions would do all the talking. The scarred man glanced back, his grin tightening into a scowl. "You think you can keep up with us, delivery girl?" he taunted. Emily tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then, without warning, she twisted the throttle and surged forward, her bike cutting through their formation like a blade. She leaned into a sharp turn, her knee skimming the asphalt as she hugged the curve with perfect precision. The bikers scrambled to keep up, their engines roaring as they tried to match her speed. But Emily was in a league of her own. She wasn't just outrunning them, she was outclassing them. "Who the hell is she?" one of the bikers shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engines. The scarred man gritted his teeth, his frustration mounting. "Doesn't matter. She's not getting away with this." Emily could feel the tension rising behind her, the bikers growing more desperate as they struggled to regain control of the situation. But she wasn't just running from them. She was leading them. The road ahead split into two lanes, one leading into a wide open stretch of highway and the other veering into a narrow alleyway. Emily didn't hesitate. She chose the alleyway, her bike slipping into the tight space with ease. The bikers hesitated for a split second before following, their larger bikes struggling to navigate the confined space. Emily could hear the scrape of metal against brick as one of them miscalculated a turn, his bike slamming into the wall with a sickening crunch. She didn't look back. The alley opened up into a deserted parking lot, the dim glow of streetlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Emily slowed her bike, coming to a stop in the center of the lot. She turned off the engine, the sudden silence almost deafening after the roar of the chase. The remaining bikers burst into the lot, their engines growling as they surrounded her once again. The scarred man dismounted his bike, his face a mask of rage. "You think you're clever, huh?" he snarled, taking a step toward her. Emily removed her helmet, shaking out her hair as she fixed him with a steady gaze. Her calm demeanor was unnerving, her lack of fear throwing him off balance. "I think," she said, her voice steady and cold, "you picked the wrong person to mess with." The scarred man sneered, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. He didn't know what to make of her, this delivery woman who had outrun and outmaneuvered his entire crew. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. Emily's lips curled into a faint smile. "Just someone who knows how to handle a bike," she said. "Better than you ever will." The tension in the parking lot was palpable, the bikers shifting uneasily as they waited to see what would happen next. They had underestimated her once. They wouldn't make the same mistake again. But Emily wasn't done yet. She had one more lesson to teach them, a lesson they wouldn't forget anytime soon. It started as a regular delivery, a quiet evening, a stack of orders, and a familiar route she had taken countless times. Emily enjoyed nights like this. The streets were less chaotic, the city alive with the distant hum of nightlife rather than the frenzy of rush hour. She had just picked up a hot order, a loaded burger and fries from a corner diner, and was making her way toward her destination. The air was crisp, and the glow of streetlights flickered off her helmet as she maneuvered her bike through the semi-empty streets. The familiar rumble of engines filled the air, faint at first, blending into the background noise. Emily didn't pay much attention. This was the city, after all, and noise was a constant companion. But as she approached the next intersection, the sound grew louder, more insistent. The moment she slowed for the red light, they appeared. A group of bikers, their engines growling like a pack of wolves, slid into view from a side street. Clad in black leather jackets adorned with patches and studs, they exuded arrogance and menace. Their laughter carried over the rumble of their engines as they spotted her. "Hey, delivery girl," one of them called out, his voice loud and taunting. He revved his engine for emphasis, the sound sharp and aggressive. Emily didn't react. She kept her eyes forward, her grip on the handlebars firm. She had dealt with jerks like this before, men who saw her as an easy target, someone to mess with for their own amusement. The biker who had spoken smirked at her silence, his confidence only growing. "What's the rush? That burger gonna get cold," he sneered, gesturing to the delivery bag strapped securely to the back of her bike. The others joined in, their laughter echoing through the intersection. One of them pulled up alongside her, his bike so close that their handlebars almost touched. "You look tense," he said mockingly. "Need a little help getting where you're going?" Emily still didn't respond. Inside, she was calm but alert. She had learned long ago not to let fear or anger dictate her actions. These bikers didn't know who they were dealing with, and she wasn't about to give them the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. The light turned green, and Emily eased forward, maintaining her composure. But the bikers weren't done with her. "Ah, come on, don't be shy," another one called out, revving his engine as he pulled up on her other side. "We're just trying to have a little fun." The group began to surround her, their bikes forming a loose circle as they sped down the street. They weren't trying to block her yet, but their intentions were clear. They wanted to intimidate her, to make her feel trapped. Emily's eyes darted to her mirrors, taking in their positions and movements. Years of stunt work had trained her to read situations like this quickly and accurately. These weren't seasoned bikers or professional riders. They were reckless, overconfident, and uncoordinated, a dangerous combination, but one she knew how to handle. The leader of the group, a tall man with a scar running down his cheek, pulled ahead of her and turned his head, grinning. "What's the matter, delivery girl? Cat got your tongue?" The others laughed, their voices mingling with the roar of their engines. One of them swerved closer, his knee brushing against her bike. "Or maybe you're just scared," he added, his grin widening as he saw no reaction from her. Emily tightened her grip on the handlebars, her knuckles whitening beneath her gloves. She wasn't scared, not in the slightest. What she felt was something else entirely: focus. "Let's see how fast you can really go," the scarred man shouted, twisting his throttle and speeding ahead. The others followed, their bikes roaring as they surged forward. Emily didn't rise to the bait. She kept her pace steady, her mind working through the situation. She could feel their eyes on her, waiting for her to react, to make a mistake they could pounce on. One of the bikers, a stocky man with a patch that read Grinder stitched onto his jacket, dropped back to ride alongside her again. He leaned in closer this time, close enough that Emily could see the gleam of his teeth beneath his helmet. "Come on, sweetheart," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "We're just trying to have a little fun. Don't be so uptight." Emily's jaw tightened beneath her helmet, but she stayed silent. She had nothing to prove to these men. They saw her as a target because of her silence, her unassuming demeanor. What they didn't realize was that she wasn't ignoring them out of fear, she was calculating. Grinder revved his engine again, the sound deafening in the narrow street. "What's wrong? Scared you'll spill the fries?" he sneered, laughing at his own joke. The scarred man slowed down just enough to fall back into her line of sight. He turned his head, his smirk sharper now. "You know," he said, his voice carrying over the growl of the engines, "we could make this delivery for you. Save you the trouble." His meaning was clear, and the laughter from his crew confirmed it. They weren't just playing around anymore, they were testing her, trying to see how far they could push before she broke. But Emily didn't break. Instead, she glanced at the road ahead. A narrow alleyway loomed on her right, barely wide enough for one bike, let alone a group. Most riders would have avoided it, especially at the speed they were going. But Emily wasn't most riders. She slowed down just enough to create space between her and the lead biker. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, she veered sharply into the alley, her bike leaning at an angle that would have sent most riders skidding to the ground. The move caught the bikers off guard. For a moment, they hesitated, their confusion evident as they realized she wasn't playing their game. Did she just? One of them started, but his words were drowned out by the roar of Emily's engine as she disappeared into the shadows. After her, the scarred man barked, his face contorted with anger. The group followed, their larger bikes struggling to navigate the tight space. The alley was filled with obstacles, trash bins, discarded pallets, and uneven pavement, but Emily maneuvered through it all with ease. Her bike seemed to dance through the chaos, her movements precise and fluid. One of the bikers wasn't so lucky. He misjudged a turn, his handlebar clipping a metal bin and sending him skidding into the wall with a loud crash. The sound of metal scraping against brick echoed through the alley, followed by a string of curses. Emily didn't look back. She had no intention of stopping until she was sure they had learned their lesson or until she had taught it to them. The alley opened up into a back street, and Emily accelerated, her bike roaring as she put more distance between herself and the group. But she knew they wouldn't give up so easily. The scarred man's ego wouldn't allow it. And that was exactly what she was counting on. The bikers burst out of the alley, one by one, their engines roaring as they scrambled to catch up. The scarred man was at the front, his jaw tight with anger. Emily had outmaneuvered them, and he wasn't about to let that slide. "Don't let her get away," he barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. The group spread out, their bikes weaving through the narrow back streets in pursuit of Emily. But she wasn't running blindly. Every turn she took was deliberate, every maneuver calculated. She had spent years training for moments like this, not in the controlled environment of a movie set, but on the streets, where split-second decisions meant the difference between success and disaster. Emily glanced at her mirrors, noting the distance between her and her pursuers. They were still too close, but they were sloppy, their movements erratic. They relied on intimidation and brute force, not skill or strategy. That would be their downfall. As she approached an intersection, Emily made a sharp right turn, her bike leaning dangerously close to the ground. The tires screeched against the asphalt, but she didn't falter. Behind her, the sound of engines grew louder as the bikers closed in. The scarred man took the corner too fast, his back wheel skidding as he struggled to stay upright. "She's just a delivery girl," he shouted, frustration seeping into his voice. "How the hell is she doing this? She's got a death wish, that's how," one of the others muttered, his eyes darting between Emily and the road ahead. But Emily wasn't reckless, she was precise. She knew exactly how far she could push her bike, how much speed she could carry through each turn. Her years of stunt work had honed her instincts to razor-sharp precision. And unlike her pursuers, she didn't need to prove anything. She just needed to finish what they had started. The road ahead widened, leading to an overpass that loomed above the city. Emily's eyes flicked to the gaps in the barriers along the sides of the road, gaps she knew she could use to her advantage. The scarred man was gaining on her, his bike roaring as he pushed it to its limits. "You think you're clever," he shouted, his voice laced with venom. "We'll see how clever you are when you're off that bike and on the ground." Emily didn't respond. Instead, she leaned forward, her bike surging ahead as she approached the overpass. The scarred man followed, his crew close behind. The wind whipped around her, the city lights a blur as she raced across the bridge. She could hear the bikers behind her, their engines growling like a pack of angry beasts. They were relentless, their egos driving them to keep up no matter the cost. But Emily wasn't worried. She had led them here for a reason. The gap in the barrier was just ahead, a narrow opening that led to a steep drop onto a lower road. To most riders, it would have been a death sentence. But to Emily, it was an opportunity. Without hesitation, she veered toward the gap, her bike tilting at an angle that defied gravity. The front wheel lifted slightly as she launched herself through the opening, the sound of the engine echoing in her ears. For a moment, there was nothing but air beneath her tires. The world seemed to slow as she soared through the gap, her body perfectly aligned with the bike. Then, with a jarring thud, her wheels hit the lower road, the suspension absorbing the impact. Behind her, the bikers skidded to a halt, their faces a mix of shock and disbelief. The scarred man stared at the gap, his hands gripping the handlebars so tightly his knuckles turned white. "She's insane," one of them muttered, shaking his head. The scarred man's jaw clenched. "She's not getting away with this." He twisted the throttle, his bike roaring as he took off down the overpass, searching for another way to catch up. The others followed, their engines screaming as they pushed their machines to the limit. Emily didn't look back. She knew they wouldn't give up, not yet. But she also knew they were playing her game now, and she had the advantage. The lower road led into an industrial area, the streets lined with warehouses and shipping containers. It was a maze of narrow lanes and dead ends, the perfect place to turn the tables. Emily slowed her bike just enough to let the sound of the approaching engines grow louder. She wanted them to think they were closing in, that she was losing her edge. The scarred man spotted her first, his eyes narrowing as he saw her bike slip between two rows of shipping containers. "There she is," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty streets. The group followed, their bikes roaring as they entered the maze. But Emily was already 2 steps ahead. She navigated the narrow lanes with ease, her bike weaving through the containers like a needle threading fabric. Behind her, the bikers struggled to keep up, their larger machines clumsy in the confined space. The first trap came quickly. Emily took a sharp left, her tires skidding slightly as she accelerated. The scarred man followed, his confidence growing as he gained ground. But he didn't see the stack of pallets until it was too late. Emily had timed her turn perfectly, her maneuver causing the unstable stack to topple just as the scarred man approached. The wooden planks crashed onto the road, forcing him to swerve hard to avoid them. He barely managed to stay upright, his curses filling the air as he struggled to regain control. One of the other bikers wasn't so lucky. His front wheel caught on a piece of debris, sending him tumbling to the ground in a tangle of metal and leather. "Damn it," the scarred man shouted, his frustration boiling over. Emily didn't slow down. She moved through the maze like a ghost, her bike silent compared to the cacophony behind her. Every turn, every maneuver was designed to confuse and frustrate her pursuers, to make them question their own skills. The bikers' confidence was unraveling. They had started the night as predators, but now they felt like prey. "Where is she?" one of them shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "She's playing with us," another muttered, his eyes darting nervously around the shadows. The scarred man gritted his teeth, his anger threatening to overwhelm him. "Enough of this," he growled. "We'll box her in. She can't run forever." But Emily wasn't running. She was waiting. As the bikers regrouped, their engines echoing through the industrial yard, Emily positioned herself behind a stack of containers. She could see them clearly, their movements frantic and disorganized. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. The time for running was over. It was time to strike. The taunts came fast and loud now, their voices cutting through the stillness of the night. "Come on, delivery girl, show us what you've got," one of the bikers yelled, swerving dangerously close to Emily's bike. The tires of his motorcycle grazed hers, sending a shiver through the air, but Emily didn't flinch. Another biker, with a wild grin plastered across his face, reached toward the delivery bag strapped to her bike. "Let's see what you're carrying," he shouted, grabbing at it. He missed, his hand snapping back empty, but his laughter rang out anyway, full of arrogance and disdain. Emily's expression remained unchanged. Beneath the visor of her helmet, her lips were set in a calm, determined line. Her eyes darted to her side mirrors, tracking every move of the bikers surrounding her. They were trying to box her in, their engines roaring louder as they closed the gaps around her. She shifted gears, the subtle hum of her engine deepening as her bike surged with potential energy. She wasn't scared, not even close. Chaos on two wheels was nothing new to her. She had faced bigger, faster, and smarter adversaries on her bike, but none of them had been prepared for what she could do. And these bikers? They had no idea who they were messing with. Emily's mind was sharp, her thoughts racing not with fear, but with precision. Years of stunt training had drilled one lesson into her over and over again: timing was everything. Every move had to be calculated, every reaction perfectly executed. She glanced at the bikers flanking her, their overconfidence dripping from every rev of their engines, every cocky laugh. They were uncoordinated, reckless, and predictable, a combination that Emily knew she could exploit. The scarred man, who seemed to be their leader, pulled ahead, his bike weaving aggressively across the road to block her path. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart," he called out, his voice a mix of mockery and threat. Emily tilted her head slightly, as if considering his words. Then, without warning, she veered sharply to the left, her bike leaning at an angle that seemed almost impossible to recover from. One of the bikers on her left swerved in surprise, his bike wobbling as he struggled to maintain control. "Whoa! What the?" he yelled, but Emily was already ahead of him, her bike slipping through the gap like water through cracks. The scarred man snarled, twisting his throttle as he gave chase. "Stay on her," he barked at his crew. "Don't let her pull that stunt crap on us." Stunt crap? The words echoed in Emily's mind, and for a brief moment, the corner of her mouth twitched into a small, amused smile. He was closer to the truth than he realized. Another biker tried to cut her off, his bike roaring as he pulled up beside her. "Not so fast," he shouted, reaching out as if to grab her handlebars. Big mistake. Emily shifted her weight ever so slightly, her bike responding with the grace of a predator. She tapped the brake just enough to let the biker overshoot her, his momentum carrying him forward. Then, with a flick of her wrist, she accelerated, her bike roaring as she slipped behind him. The move was so seamless, so effortless, that the biker didn't realize what had happened until he glanced over his shoulder and saw her tail light glowing behind him. "What the hell?" he muttered, his face twisting in confusion. Emily didn't give him a chance to recover. She leaned into the next turn, her bike hugging the curve as if it were glued to the asphalt. The bikers followed, their larger, heavier machines struggling to keep pace. The scarred man growled in frustration. "She's playing games with us," he yelled, his voice cutting through the chaos. Emily's calm demeanor hid the fire that burned within her. These men thought they were in control, that their numbers and aggression gave them the upper hand. But Emily wasn't just a delivery driver. She wasn't just someone trying to get from point A to point B. She was a force of nature, and she was about to show them what that meant. As the bikers closed in again, Emily's eyes scanned the road ahead. The next stretch was perfect for what she had in mind: a long, straight path with plenty of room for maneuvering. She eased off the throttle slightly, letting the bikers think she was slowing down, that they were finally wearing her out. "Got her now," one of them yelled, his voice full of triumph. But Emily wasn't slowing down. She was waiting. The bikers began to fan out, their bikes forming a line as they tried to surround her. The scarred man grinned, his confidence returning. "Nowhere to run, delivery girl," he taunted. Emily's grip on the handlebars tightened, her knuckles white beneath her gloves. She took a deep breath, her heartbeat steady and controlled. Then, with a burst of speed that seemed to defy the laws of physics, she shot forward, her bike weaving between the bikers with a precision that left them stunned. "She's like a ghost," one of them shouted, his voice tinged with panic. The scarred man's grin faltered as he watched Emily disappear into the distance. "Stay on her," he roared, his frustration boiling over. But Emily wasn't done yet. She wasn't just trying to escape, she was setting the stage. The straight road gave way to a series of tight curves, and Emily leaned into each one with a grace that came from years of practice. Her bike seemed to dance through the twists and turns, the sound of the engine like a symphony of power and control. The bikers, on the other hand, were struggling. Their heavier machines weren't built for this kind of agility, and it showed. One of them misjudged a turn, his bike skidding dangerously close to the edge of the road. "Damn it," he yelled, his voice filled with frustration and fear. Emily glanced in her mirrors, watching as the group began to falter. They were losing their edge, their confidence cracking under the pressure. Good. The next stretch of road led into an industrial area, a labyrinth of warehouses and shipping containers. Emily knew the layout well, she had scouted it during one of her many late-night rides. It was the perfect place to even the odds. She slowed slightly, letting the bikers think they were gaining on her. The scarred man's voice rang out again, his tone laced with desperation. "Don't let her get away." Emily smirked beneath her helmet. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered to herself. As she entered the maze of containers, Emily's mind shifted into overdrive. Every turn, every shadow became a part of her plan. She was in her element now, and the bikers were about to realize just how outclassed they were. This wasn't just a chase anymore. This was a reckoning. The bikers roared into the industrial zone, their engines echoing off the metal walls of the shipping containers. The scarred man led the pack, his eyes scanning the dimly lit maze for any sign of Emily. He was furious now. This wasn't just about scaring some delivery driver anymore. She had humiliated them, and he wasn't going to let it slide. "She can't have gone far," one of the bikers muttered, his voice carrying over the growl of their engines. The scarred man sneered. "She thinks she's clever, but we've got her cornered. Spread out. She's playing hide and seek, and I don't lose games." Emily, tucked away in the shadows, watched as the bikers split up. Their movements were reckless, driven by their bruised egos and growing frustration. She stayed perfectly still, her bike idling silently as she calculated her next move. Her years of training had taught her how to turn any terrain into an advantage, and this maze of containers was no exception. Every twist and turn, every stack of pallets or parked truck was a potential tool. The first biker came into view, his head swiveling as he scanned the area. Emily's grip tightened on the handlebars, her pulse steady. She waited until he passed by, his focus elsewhere, before she eased her bike forward, keeping her movements as silent as a shadow. Ahead, she spotted a stack of metal drums piled precariously on a pallet. Her mind worked quickly, envisioning how to use the environment to her advantage. She pulled up alongside the stack, her gloved hands working deftly as she pushed one of the drums just enough to unsettle the others. Then, she revved her engine just loud enough to catch the biker's attention. "Got you now," he shouted, spinning his bike around to charge toward her. Emily stayed in place until the last possible second, her calm demeanor unnerving. As the biker closed in, she leaned forward, her bike springing to life and darting away like a bullet. The biker's focus was locked on her, his speed picking up as he chased her down the narrow lane. He didn't notice the drums wobbling dangerously behind him, the stack teetering like a house of cards. With a deafening crash, the drums tumbled onto the road, the metal echoing through the maze. The biker swerved violently, his tires screeching as he tried to avoid the debris. But it was too late. His front wheel clipped one of the drums, and he lost control, his bike skidding out from under him. The scarred man heard the commotion and cursed under his breath. "What the hell is going on back there?" "She's setting traps," another biker called out, his voice tinged with panic. Emily smirked beneath her helmet. They were starting to realize what they were up against, but it was too late for second thoughts. The scarred man barked orders, his voice filled with anger. "Stay focused. We've got her outnumbered. She's just one woman. but even he was beginning to feel the pressure. Emily wasn't behaving like an ordinary delivery driver or even an ordinary rider. She was methodical, unshaken, and far more skilled than anyone they had encountered. The second trap came just as easily as the first. Emily led another biker through a narrow path between two rows of containers. She glanced over her shoulder, watching as he followed her, his overconfidence blinding him to the danger ahead. At the end of the path, a steel cable was stretched across the lane, low enough to be hidden in the shadows but high enough to catch a speeding bike. Emily had spotted it earlier and had deliberately chosen this route. She accelerated, her bike clearing the cable with ease. The biker behind her wasn't so lucky. His front wheel caught on the cable, and the bike flipped forward, sending him tumbling onto the ground with a grunt of pain. The sound of the crash sent another wave of frustration through the group. "She's toying with us," one of them shouted, his voice cracking. Emily didn't stop. She moved deeper into the maze, her mind always a step ahead. The scarred man's voice echoed through the industrial yard as he tried to rally his crew. "She can't keep this up forever. Stick together and corner her." But Emily wasn't running out of steam. If anything, she was just getting started. The third biker came at her head-on, his bike barreling toward her in a show of raw aggression. Emily held her ground, her bike idling as if she were waiting for him to make the first move. "You're done," he shouted, his engine roaring as he charged. At the last second, Emily twisted the throttle, her bike shooting forward with a burst of speed. She leaned to the side as she passed him, her boot catching the edge of his handlebars. The impact wasn't enough to knock him off completely, but it sent his bike wobbling dangerously. He tried to correct, but his momentum carried him into a stack of wooden crates, the splintering wood sending him sprawling. Emily didn't look back. She was already focused on the next phase of her plan. By now, the scarred man was livid. His crew had been whittled down one by one, and he was no closer to catching Emily. His hands clenched the handlebars so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Enough of this," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the yard. "Face me, you coward." Emily slowed her bike, her engine rumbling softly as she turned to face him. She could see the rage in his eyes, the way his chest heaved with every breath. "You want me," she called out, her voice calm but firm. "Come and get me." The scarred man didn't need another invitation. He twisted the throttle, his bike surging forward like a beast unleashed. But Emily wasn't afraid. She had been preparing for this moment from the start. As the scarred man closed the distance, Emily's mind was razor sharp, her focus unshakable. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a calculated move, and she was in complete control. The scarred man didn't realize it yet, but he was walking straight into her trap. It happened in a heartbeat. The air seemed to crackle with tension as the bikers closed in, their engines roaring like angry beasts. Emily remained calm, her mind a calculated machine of precision and timing. She could feel the weight of their arrogance, their belief that they had her cornered. The first biker lunged to grab her handlebar, his gloved hand outstretched and his bike dangerously close. Emily waited until the last possible second, her reflexes honed to perfection. With a sharp twist of her handlebars, she leaned into a turn so tight it seemed impossible. The biker's hand swiped at empty air as his bike veered out of control, skidding into a parked car with a deafening crash. "Damn it," he yelled, clutching his leg as the others sped past him, too focused on Emily to stop. Another biker surged forward, his engine growling as he tried to block her path. He revved loudly, his front wheel lifting slightly off the ground in an aggressive show of force. Emily didn't flinch. Instead, she accelerated, her bike charging forward with a power that seemed to defy its size. And then, she did the unthinkable. With a perfect flick of her wrist and a subtle shift in weight, Emily launched her bike into the air. The machine soared over the biker, blocking her path, her body moving in perfect harmony with the vehicle. For a split second, time seemed to freeze. The street lights caught the glint of her helmet and the sleek lines of her bike as she performed a flawless flip, her silhouette a blur of precision and grace. The bikers below stared in disbelief, their jaws dropping as she landed smoothly on the other side. Her tires hit the ground with a controlled thud, the momentum carrying her forward as if nothing extraordinary had happened. "What the hell was that?" one of the bikers yelled, his voice cracking with panic. The scarred leader narrowed his eyes, his anger boiling into something darker. He twisted the throttle harder, his bike roaring as he closed the gap between them. "Who are you?" he shouted, his voice a mix of frustration and fear. Emily slowed her bike slightly, just enough to let the leader catch up. She turned her head, the corner of her mouth curling into a smirk visible even beneath her helmet. "Just a delivery woman," she said, her voice calm but tinged with irony. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "who's also a stunt driver in action movies." Her words hit like a thunderclap, the truth sinking in as the bikers exchanged bewildered glances. "No way," one of them muttered. "She's messing with us," another said, though his shaky voice betrayed his uncertainty. But Emily wasn't done proving her point. The scarred leader growled, his ego refusing to accept defeat. "You think you're tough because you can do tricks? Let's see how tough you are when it's one-on-one." He gunned his engine, his bike surging forward like a battering ram. Emily didn't flinch. She waited, her grip steady, her focus unshaken. As the leader bore down on her, Emily's bike moved with the fluidity of a dancer. She swerved at the last second, her tires skimming the edge of the road as she leaned low to the ground. The scarred man overshot, his bike roaring past her as she executed a flawless U-turn, now behind him. "Damn it," he spat, twisting around to see her tail light glowing in the distance. He jerked his handlebars, his bike screeching as he turned to chase her again. But Emily wasn't running. She led him into a tighter section of the industrial maze, the walls of shipping containers closing in like a trap. The leader followed, his frustration mounting with every turn. "Where are you going to hide now, huh?" he shouted, his voice bouncing off the metal walls. Emily didn't respond. Instead, she reached into her jacket and pulled out something small and metallic, a remote control. The leader's bike roared closer, his confidence surging as he saw her slow down. "Gotcha," he yelled, his grin returning. And then, Emily pressed the button. The ground behind her erupted in a spray of sparks and smoke as a series of pyrotechnics exploded along the path. The scarred man's bike skidded wildly as he tried to avoid the chaos, his tires screeching as he fought for control. "What the hell?" he screamed, his voice lost in the roar of flames and smoke. Emily didn't stop. She zigzagged through the chaos with practiced ease, her movements smooth and unhurried. The remaining bikers, now far behind, hesitated as they approached the wall of fire. "She's insane," one of them shouted, pulling to a stop. "No, she's a pro," another muttered, his voice filled with reluctant awe. The scarred man, however, wasn't ready to admit defeat. He pushed through the smoke, his eyes stinging and his heart pounding. When he emerged on the other side, he saw Emily waiting for him in an open clearing, her bike idling quietly. "End of the line," she said, her tone even but commanding. The scarred man dismounted, his hands clenched into fists. "You think you've won," he sneered, his voice dripping with defiance. Emily removed her helmet slowly, shaking out her hair as she stared him down. Her calm gaze pierced through his bravado, and for the first time, he hesitated. "You never had a chance," she said simply. The scarred man lunged toward her, his anger finally boiling over. But Emily didn't need her bike to finish this. With a swift, fluid motion, she sidestepped his attack, using his momentum against him. He stumbled, and before he could recover, Emily delivered a precise kick to the back of his knee, sending him to the ground. "You've been chasing the wrong person," she said, standing over him. "Next time, think twice before you mess with someone you don't understand." As the remaining bikers watched from a distance, their leader crumpled on the ground. They finally realized what they were up against. One by one, they turned their bikes around, disappearing into the night without another word. Emily took a deep breath, the adrenaline fading as she climbed back onto her bike. She strapped her helmet on and glanced at the scarred man one last time. "Your fight's over," she said. Then she revved her engine and sped off into the night, her tail light disappearing like a ghost. The industrial yard fell silent, the echoes of the confrontation lingering in the air. The scarred man sat alone, the weight of his defeat settling in. Emily was gone, but her message was clear: never underestimate the quiet ones. The silence that followed her departure was deafening, broken only by the faint crackling of the pyrotechnic sparks still fading in the distance. The scarred man lay on the ground, his chest heaving as he struggled to process what had just happened. His pride was shattered, his crew scattered, and his reputation irreparably tarnished. She planned all of this," he muttered to himself, his voice hoarse. He clenched his fists, the gravel biting into his palms as he pushed himself up to a sitting position. The humiliation burned hotter than the smoldering wreckage around him. Meanwhile, Emily rode through the city streets, her mind replaying the confrontation. She had faced tougher opponents before, but there was something satisfying about bringing these overconfident bullies to their knees. For her, it wasn't just about showing them who they were messing with, it was about proving a point. Her phone buzzed in the secure pocket of her jacket, breaking her thoughts. She pulled over to a quiet spot, her bike purring softly as she retrieved the device. A familiar name lit up the screen: Marcus, her stunt coordinator. "You've got perfect timing," she said as she answered the call, her voice light with amusement. "Emily, where are you?" "We've got the shoot tomorrow, and I need to go over some adjustments to the scene," Marcus said, his tone brisk but not unkind. "I'm fine. Just handled a situation," Emily replied, a wry smile tugging at her lips. "Let me guess, city drama? Another late-night delivery run gone wrong?" "Something like that," she said, glancing over her shoulder at the fading glow of the industrial yard. "Don't worry. I'll be there on time and ready to roll." "You'd better be," Marcus teased. "Your bike stunts are the highlight of this production. Don't think I didn't notice how you fine-tuned that high-speed flip last week. You've been holding out on us." Emily chuckled. "A stunt driver's got to keep a few secrets, right?" Hanging up, she took a moment to collect herself. The city stretched out before her, its lights twinkling like a sea of stars. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not just from winning the fight but from knowing that her skills had once again proven their worth. Back at the industrial yard, the scarred man's crew slowly began to return, their bikes moving cautiously through the wreckage. They found him sitting in the middle of the clearing, his expression dark and brooding. "Boss, what do we do now?" one of them asked hesitantly. The scarred man didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened, his eyes fixed on the spot where Emily had last stood. He had underestimated her, and it had cost him everything. "She's not just some delivery girl," he said finally, his voice low and bitter. "No kidding," another biker muttered, earning a sharp glare from their leader. The scarred man stood, brushing the dust from his jacket. "This isn't over," he growled. "She might have won tonight, but nobody humiliates me like that and gets away with it." The other bikers exchanged uneasy glances. They had seen what Emily was capable of, and the idea of going after her again didn't sit well with them. "Maybe we should just let it go," one of them ventured cautiously. "I mean, she's clearly not someone to mess with." The scarred man's eyes flashed with anger. "Let it go? She made fools of us. If we back down now, we'll lose all respect on the streets." Another biker hesitated before speaking. "But what if she's more than we think? I mean, Did you see the way she handled that bike? That's not normal. That's professional. The scarred man didn't respond. Deep down, he knew they were right. Emily wasn't just skilled, she was a master of her craft, someone who had spent years perfecting her abilities. She had made him look like a rank amateur, and the sting of that realization cut deeper than he cared to admit. As his crew debated their next move, Emily was already miles away, weaving through the city with effortless precision. She made her final delivery of the night, her professionalism intact despite the chaos she had just left behind. The customer, a young woman in her 20s, opened the door with a tired smile. "Thanks so much," she said, taking the bag of food. "No problem," Emily replied, her tone polite but detached. As she turned to leave, the woman hesitated. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you've had a rough night." Emily paused, then gave her a small smile. "I'm fine. Just another day on the job." She walked back to her bike, the weight of the evening settling on her shoulders. It wasn't the physical strain she was used to that, but the knowledge that her life was a constant balancing act. On one side, she was the quiet delivery woman, blending into the background of the city. On the other, she was a highly skilled stunt driver, capable of feats that left people in awe. It was a duality she had learned to embrace, but nights like this reminded her of how precarious the balance could be. As she rode home, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. She thought about the bikers, their arrogance, and their eventual defeat. She thought about the scarred man and the look of disbelief on his face when she revealed her true self. And then she thought about the road ahead, both the literal one beneath her tires and the metaphorical one that stretched into the unknown. Emily Dawson was more than just a name on a delivery app. She was a force to be reckoned with, a quiet storm that no one saw coming. And for anyone who dared to cross her path, one thing was certain: they would never underestimate her again. The chaos of the chase gave way to clarity. The bikers, once so sure of their dominance, began to falter under the pressure. Their overconfidence was their undoing. Emily, with years of experience and an unshakable focus, played them like a master chess player. One of the bikers tried to take a shortcut, veering sharply into a side street, but his tires couldn't handle the sudden turn. He skidded out, his bike slamming into a pile of crates. Another revved his engine in frustration, attempting to close the gap between himself and Emily. But his haste betrayed him. He misjudged a curve, his bike spinning out of control and slamming into a barricade. Emily, meanwhile, moved like a shadow, always one step ahead. Every turn she took was deliberate, every movement precise. She led the remaining bikers into an industrial zone, a maze of narrow alleys and towering shipping containers. Here, their large, flashy bikes became liabilities. The leader, scarred and seething with rage, shouted commands at his crew. "Keep up! Don't let her get away!" But his voice lacked the confidence it had earlier. He knew, deep down, that they were losing. Emily glanced back briefly, her lips curling into a subtle smirk beneath her helmet. She guided her bike into an impossibly narrow passage, the walls of the alley so close that sparks flew as the handlebars grazed the brick. The bikers hesitated. "She's crazy," one of them yelled, pulling back. "Then we're crazy too," the leader snapped, forcing his bike forward. But the narrow space was unforgiving. One by one, the bikers either stopped or found themselves stuck, their bulky bikes wedged between the walls. Emily emerged on the other side, her bike roaring triumphantly as she accelerated into the open. She didn't need to look back to know they were trapped. She had calculated every move, every turn, and the result was exactly as she had planned. But it wasn't over yet. Emily reached into her jacket and pressed a button on a small device clipped to her vest. A discreet signal was sent to a contact she had prepared in advance. Moments later, the sound of sirens filled the air. The police arrived swiftly, their flashing lights painting the industrial zone in shades of red and blue. Officers poured out of their cars, surrounding the trapped bikers. "Hands where we can see them," an officer barked. The bikers, disheveled and visibly shaken, raised their hands reluctantly. The scarred leader glared at the officers, his jaw clenched in frustration. "You've got nothing on us," he spat. "Oh, we've got plenty," the officer replied, holding up a body camera that had captured their reckless driving and harassment. "You've been causing chaos all over the city. It's time to face the consequences." The bikers' bravado crumbled. Their cocky grins were replaced by sheepish expressions as the officers began cuffing them one by one. The leader tried to resist, but his injured leg gave out, forcing him to sit on the ground. As the bikers were loaded into police vehicles, Emily was already miles away, her engine humming steadily as she completed her final delivery of the night. She arrived at the customer's door, her helmet still on, and handed over the package with her usual professionalism. "Thank you so much," the customer said, oblivious to the chaos Emily had just navigated. "No problem," Emily replied simply, turning back to her bike. She rode through the quiet streets, the adrenaline from the chase gradually fading. The city, now bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, felt calm and still. Emily allowed herself a small moment of satisfaction. Justice had been served, and the bikers had learned their lesson in the most humiliating way possible. Back at the industrial zone, the police wrapped up their operation. One of the officers, a seasoned sergeant, surveyed the scene with a bemused expression. "Who tipped us off?" he asked, holding up the anonymous alert that had led them to the bikers. "Don't know," another officer replied. "But whoever it was, they did the city a favor. These guys have been a menace for weeks." The sergeant nodded, glancing down the alley where the bikers had been trapped. He noticed the faint tire marks on the ground, the signs of a skilled rider who had outmaneuvered the gang. "Whoever they are," he said with a chuckle, "I'd hate to be on their bad side." Emily, meanwhile, returned home, parking her bike in the small garage she had meticulously organized. She removed her helmet, her face calm but satisfied. This wasn't the first time she'd dealt with trouble, and it likely wouldn't be the last. She sat on her couch, scrolling through her phone. A news alert popped up on her screen: "Reckless biker gang apprehended in dramatic pursuit." Emily skimmed the article, her lips twitching into a faint smile. The reporters had no idea who was behind the bikers' capture, and that's exactly how she wanted it. Her phone buzzed with another message, this time from Marcus, her stunt coordinator. "Don't be late tomorrow. Got a new stunt we're testing." Emily laughed softly. "Wouldn't miss it," she replied. She leaned back, the tension of the night melting away. For Emily, every challenge was an opportunity to prove her skills, to stay sharp, and to remind herself of what she was capable of. The bikers had underestimated her, as so many others had before them. But now, they would think twice before trying to intimidate someone. As she prepared for bed, Emily thought about the scarred leader and his crew, now sitting in a holding cell, their arrogance replaced by shame. She knew they would never forget the night they crossed paths with the delivery woman. For Emily, it was just another night. But for the bikers, it was a lesson they would carry forever: never judge by appearances, and never underestimate the quiet ones. And with that, Emily drifted off to sleep, ready to face whatever challenges the next day would bring. After all, she was more than ready for anything life or the streets could throw at her. The night settled into calm, the chaos of the chase nothing but a memory for Emily as her bike hummed through the quiet streets. The city, always alive with its own rhythm, seemed to pause for a moment, as if even it recognized the balance that had been restored. For Emily, this was more than a night of action, it was a reminder of who she was and what she stood for. In her line of work, whether delivering packages or orchestrating stunts for the big screen, people often overlooked her. To them, she was just another face, another worker going about her day. But what they didn't see was the fire within her, a fire forged through years of challenges, hard work, and a refusal to back down. That night wasn't just about teaching a gang of reckless bikers a lesson. It was about something deeper, about breaking stereotypes and proving that power doesn't always look the way people expect. Strength can come in many forms. It can wear a leather jacket, sit silently on a bike, or hold steady in the face of intimidation. Emily's journey was a reflection of the countless others who are underestimated every day. The quiet ones. The underdogs. The people who keep moving forward, no matter how many times they're doubted or dismissed. They don't fight for recognition, they fight for their own sense of purpose, for the satisfaction of knowing they did what was right even when no one was watching. As Emily navigated the city streets, her thoughts turned to the bikers now sitting in a jail cell. They'd probably laugh about their defeat among themselves, brushing it off as bad luck or a fluke. But deep down, she knew they'd carry the memory of this night for a long time. They'd remember the woman who outsmarted them, the woman who turned their arrogance into a spectacle of their own failure. The truth is, Emily didn't need to see their regret. She didn't crave their apology or acknowledgement. Her victory wasn't for them, it was for herself. Every turn she took, every calculated move, was a testament to her own resilience and skill. And that was enough. Her phone buzzed again, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from a friend, a fellow stunt driver who'd seen the news. Crazy night, huh? Bet you had something to do with it? Emily smirked, shaking her head. She didn't reply. Some things didn't need to be said aloud. As she reached the bridge overlooking the city, she pulled over for a moment. The skyline stretched out before her, glittering with thousands of lights, each one representing a life, a story, a struggle. She took a deep breath, letting the crisp night air fill her lungs. Her thoughts turned reflective. How many times had she been in situations where people underestimated her? How many times had she been dismissed because she wasn't loud or imposing? And how many times had she quietly proven them wrong, not with words, but with actions? Strength, she realized, wasn't about showing off. It wasn't about shouting louder or standing taller. True strength was about knowing who you are and staying true to that, no matter how others perceive you. It was about moving forward, even when the odds weren't in your favor. Emily's mind wandered to the lessons she'd learned over the years. Life wasn't always fair, and people weren't always kind. But every challenge was an opportunity to grow, to adapt, to rise above. And when the moment came to prove yourself, it wasn't about seeking validation, it was about showing yourself what you were capable of. She looked out at the city, her reflection in her helmet's visor blending with the lights. This city, with all its chaos and noise, had taught her to be strong in ways she never expected. It had shown her that while the world might try to define you, it's up to you to decide who you are. Emily swung her leg over her bike and started the engine. The familiar hum brought a sense of calm and focus. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, another delivery, another stunt, maybe even another unexpected confrontation. But she knew one thing for certain, whatever came her way, she was ready. Because strength isn't just about facing challenges. It's about embracing them, learning from them, and using them to fuel your journey forward. As she rode away, the words echoed in her mind like a mantra, never underestimate the quiet ones. The night closed around her, the city becoming a blur of lights and shadows. And Emily. She disappeared into the rhythm of the streets, a reminder that true strength doesn't need an audience, it simply is. Her story wasn't just hers, it was a story for anyone who's ever been doubted or overlooked. It was a call to action, a challenge to rise above the noise and show the world what you're made of, not with words, but with the undeniable truth of your actions. Because sometimes, the ones who seem the smallest have the biggest impact. And sometimes, the quietest roar the loudest when it truly matters.